Hello, and welcome to the Kennedy Human Rights Center Book Club. I'm Michael Schreiber and the Chief Operating Officer here, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's conversation. Our book club aims to highlight recent publications that pertain to the pillars of our work. And in this session, we're proud to read and discuss Robot Proof: When Machines Have All the Answers, Build Better People by Dr. Vivienne Ming. Frequently featured for her research and inventions in the Financial Times, The Atlantic, The Guardian, Quartz, and the New York Times, Dr. Ming is a theoretical neuroscientist, entrepreneur, author, and Kennedy Human Rights board member. She co founded Sokos Labs, her fifth company, an independent institute exploring the future of human potential. Dr. Ming launched Sokos Labs to combine her varied work with other creative experts as they expand upon the impact of global policy issues, both inside companies and throughout communities. Previously, she was a visiting scholar at UC Berkeley Redwood Center for Theoretical Neuroscience, pursuing her research in cognitive neuroprosthetics. In her free time, Dr. Ming invented AI systems to help treat her diabetic child, predict manic episodes in bipolar sufferers weeks in advance, and reunited orphan refugees with extended family members. Dr. Ming also speaks frequently on her AI driven research into inclusion and gender in business. For relaxation, she spends time as both a wife and a mother of two. Today, we're excited to have her join and discuss the book Robot Proof, which helps readers grasp the ugly and the amazing of how individuals, companies, and societies will respond to the changes that are already taking place due to the advances in AI. And with that, it's my pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Ming. And if you'd like to just start by sharing some opening thoughts, and then we'll go in.
Absolutely. Years ago now, years ago, I got invited to travel out to the far reaches of Massachusetts and give a talk for uh, now the Human Rights Center on a little panel about AI and how it will affect the future of work. And apparently, I made a bit of an impact in that discussion, as not too long afterwards, I was asked if I would join the board. And I think I had a very interesting request to join, which is what we'd really like you to do on the board is to make a little trouble. Um, that I've had this really interesting career as an academic, as an entrepreneur, and mainly my day job through my philanthropic work of just getting to help people. People bringing me interesting problems about human beings. And sometimes it's about dying kids. Sometimes it's a company that knows it has some bias in its promotion process, but can't figure out how to build, let's say, an economic model. Sometimes it's a country struggling with economic development and education policy. And the wonderful thing is, if I think I have something unique to offer, I just get to help. I pay for everything, and whatever we invent, we give away. So when this amazing organization asked if I could be a bit of a troublemaker internally, I think purely in the sense that I'm not really, an investment insider in the world, nor am I in a daily way involved in public policy. I'm a scientist who tricks venture capitalists into funding my experiments. It turns out if you keep paying them back, they never catch on. And really, all I want to do is build better people. Really, if I had my way, the title of my book would just be those last few words: build better people. In this case, in the context of AI, but it turns out the original book was like 1 million words long. And let's be clear, every publisher I talked to said Absolutely not. At the very least, it looks like there's three separate books here. So this one's about building better people in the context of AI and the future of work. The next one will be about, I have some posters behind me about all of them, about in the context of society and being different. And the last is maybe the most pertinent to a human rights organization, which is what does it mean to build better people in the context of courage and purpose? Uh, but again, seen through the eyes of someone who willingly calls themselves a professional mad scientist on LinkedIn, and really kind of believes in numbers as a way to understand the world, but that those numbers are messy and complicated. So that long rambling statement is just sort of an introduction to me. If you've never had the mispleasure of being in one of my audiences, despite being introduced frequently as an AI expert, I'm just interested in, let me put it this way. Years ago, The Atlantic wrote a very nice story about me, which opened with words that were something like, here's the woman who had the chance to make herself a better person. And now that's what she wants to do for everyone else. Because I have a very interesting life story that involves some rather self-inflicted misery, and I had the chance to do it all over again. So the book I hope we'll have a chance to talk about, and hopefully there's some questions. I would be happy to talk about anything, but it's notionally about AI, and it very much is. I'm a nerd, but it's really about people and the reality of how people actually behave in the context of AI, rather than our dreams or our nightmares.
Excellent. And we are definitely going to talk about the book because as I was reading, I had some questions that I was too nervous to type into a browser or Claude because I didn't want to tee up what I was reading and let my computer know. So in that spirit, one of the pieces that struck me as reading is part of your thesis, and feel free to correct if I misread, but is really that there's no safe quarter in the long run from the types of skills and activities and things that AI will ultimately become more than just as proficient, but likely better than humans. And so in a world, and if that is kind of the place that we eventually find ourselves, then what is the kind of way in which we would conceptualize and build people? How what is it that we need to make sure that people know, learn, do, think about in a world where the AI has become better than humans in every, imaginable functional activity?
Well, the wonderful thing is that it's not. And, you know, sometimes a nice starting place for these conversations is despite what many people might claim online, AI hasn't woken up. It's not conscious. I have a bunch of fancy degrees. I promise you, I'm not wildly speculating to say that Claude isn't secretly self-aware. The Skynet isn't looming over us, but maybe a step back. Let's start with what on its surface might seem like a bleak statement. And then I'll explain why in ways it makes me hopeful. There is no skill that is robot proof, no knowledge that is robot proof. In fact, that whole idea came from a conversation. I was invited to the Department of Education, that thing that we used to have. Um, so this was in probably 2015 or 2014. Um, so they asked me to come in and give a talk about some of my research. I'd started a number of companies doing AI in education and had gotten a little bit of notoriety in that space. And then became the chief scientist of one of the first companies doing AI in hiring. And that got me a lot of attention. And I got the White House interested in my work. People like Tom Khalil and Megan Smith and others. So I had this invitation, I gave this talk, and afterwards they had a very specific question, which is the title of one of the chapters in the book now. It was originally the title of the book, which is Dr. Ming, How do we robot proof our kids? And so the original title was How to Robot Proof Your Kids. But my publisher thought that sounded too much like a parenting book, God forbid. So instead, I wrote a book that had no allegiance to any happy, pitchable middle. Um, but the answer to that question is not anything we've been doing. You are not going to find the answer to that question in a World Economic Forum uh, white paper or in a press statement from any government I've seen. Let me recast this in a different way and begin to explain why this, in a funny way, makes me hopeful, even though I think we're sort of zombie walking towards a bad future. But we don't have to. That's maybe if there's one thesis in this book across all of my work is we don't have to accept negative outcomes as being inevitable or that we are powerless to change them, either collectively or even as individuals. So um, here's what I about this idea of robot proof. We now live in a world in which if you want the answer to a question, a problem that we understand, that's been researched, maybe only researched by, a nerd like me that spent years and years studying an esoteric question, but it exists. Or maybe the algorithm or the equation for getting a right answer exists. If that's true, it's effectively free in your pocket now. So, reasonable question is what's left? If you, me, with my fancy degrees, wanted to ask me about parts of the brain and what do they do, or is this tremor in my hand Parkinson's? It's not unreasonable to think you will get a better answer and definitely a cheaper answer out of GPT, Gemini, Claude, Mistral, any number of productized AI models that are out there. So what's the point of us? If all of those answers are already known and they're effectively for free, so I'm going to call those well-posed problems. As I talk about in the book, they're just a class of problems around which we've built our economy and really our lives for 100, 200 years more. You could go get a degree in something, learn the answers to these well-posed problems, and have a great job. And increasingly, that isn't going to be true. That even if they need a human being involved in that work, those tough, hard to derive answers will come out of a machine. And in the book, I call this the Jiffy Lube economy. Our world isn't worse for having Jiffy Lube in it instead of mom and pop, professional automobile engineers that fix your cars. But you wouldn't maybe wish for that to be your children's job. A minimal education and a computer telling them where to stick some hoses. So what's left over? And what's left over is what I call ill-posed problems. Like when forget the right answers. We don't even know what the next question is. That's the job. If you're someone like me who started their career as a scientist, that's always been my job. I think people have this misapprehension that science is a series of facts that we know about the world, because that's what science class is at school. My job as, let's say, a scientist advising a graduate student that wants to become the next generation of scientists, turns out it's not about teaching facts at all, or knowledge, or even really skills. My students are brilliant. All these UC Berkeley, University College London, UC San Diego students, they can go figure this out on themselves. They're brilliant. The answers are in their pocket today, but they were always libraries, at least in our modern world. They could have learned all of this. My job was never teaching them knowledge. My job is teaching them what to do when the knowledge runs out and there are no more answers and you're not even certain what the next question is. So, the thing that I think might seem terrifying to everyone, and that's reasonable, but I look at with real hope, is maybe something like this is now everyone's job. What do you do when there are no more answers and you need to explore the unknown? And what I take time in the book is to go through the psychology of this, just the real world practical issues in education and in workforce. I even have a chapter that specifically looks at the civil rights implications of all of this. What happens when so much power is concentrated in the hands of, 3 to 5 companies in essentially 2 countries? It's profound. So I know this has been sort of they love me on radio. I have nothing but long answers to every question. But this is the context of what I go through in the book is how do we realign our whole thinking about AI away from simple answers like, oh my goodness, AI will do all this boring work and it will free us to be amazing and creative, or AI will steal all the jobs and it will leave nothing behind for the rest of us, to really focus on what can it do? What are we uniquely good at? And the truly challenging goal in front of us from a policy perspective, which is realistically, how many people can we pull across that divide from the well-posed economy to the ill-posed economy, the routine to the creative, today with the existing workforce? And I think that the realistic number can be a really alarming one. And then how do we change this for the next generation and really move forward? And then to tie it back to, human rights, how do we make certain there's human dignity at the center of what will be a massive transition, and one which globalization doesn't suggest we are well prepared to actually handle, at least in the sort of mature economies in the world.
Thank you for that. I want to pick up on the thread that you included there around policy. Kind of combining that. We don't have to passively accept that the AI gets to figure out how and what and where it gets used, and we are actors in this story. But one of those elements is, what is the framework? What are the rules of the road that we are setting as we go down? And I'm curious, clearly the current administration has laid out a belief that, a total absence of constraint is the most productive way to ensure the set of desired outcomes. Others have highlighted, kind of the need for a safety led and kind of driven from fairly defined variables, but there's everything in between. And I know a lot of our audience today are people who spend a lot of time thinking about policy. I was just curious, based on your look, and not just what's in the book, but your prior activities, engagements, products. What do you suggest as the kind of right regulatory approach for us as AI is continuing to evolve in this early stage?
We can walk through this in so many complex ways, and truly, and this is a threat as much as anything. I could take the next 8 hours and happily talk through these issues, but let's just hit the highlights here. One, I think that there are, and I talk about this in the book, there are 3 different poles at play. Um, One is in the private side, the corporate world. I know investors are a big part of what makes our organization tick. I hope there are some people leading these sorts of things here. Starting way back with Vanderbilt, the idea of having a voluntary, open audit of your financials to build trust in investors was something that wasn't mandated. That was you just to break away from friendship networks and get a broader, more market-led investment framework. Companies had to open the books and lead audits. So on the private side, expecting I know kicking and screaming is the only way Google and OpenAI and these others will go for it, but I believe it's rationally in their self-interest. And I'm sure the big professional services firms would love to do lead this, but to open the books and do algorithmic audits, data audits, are our models doing what they claim that they do? I would have said this before the rise of large language models like ChatGPT, all the more so today, given how deeply they've moved into our lives. And I'm going to come back to this, but I think we need new frameworks for understanding what their capabilities are, what are called benchmarks, AI benchmarks. I'm going to conclude there. So the next is direct legislation. I'm going to say this very honestly. I mean, my ideal political leanings are very progressive, but I also live in the real world. I'm an AI realist. I'm a political realist. What does it take to actually make good policy? Probably not a bunch of very elderly people putting part-time attention into one of the fastest moving and most powerful technologies in history. So I believe that the role of the public sector, whether we're talking about the EU or the US or even in China, is really building strong institutions. How do you build a strong institution empowered by a legislature to actually that believes in what these models can do? You know, I build AI for my own son's diabetes, for bipolar disorder, for postpartum and perimenopausal depression, for Alzheimer's. Even in those specific domains, I am totally in. I drank the Kool-Aid 30 years ago when I was an undergrad and I built my first model. I got to reunite orphan refugees with their extended family members. All stories in the book, if you don't mind the salesy pitch here. And they're wonderful stories. They're human stories. It just happens I used this really powerful tool. So these institutions, I think, also need to be believers in what AI can do. What they can't be is believers that AI will do it no matter what. It turns out it's really hard for any technology to truly make the world a better place. My line that I say frequently is not only not only should technology make us better when we're using it, and I would argue a lot of technology fails, and in many cases AI, and I'll come back to that later. It should make us better than where we started when we turn it off again. And so many amazingly positive technologies actually fail that second test. So again, if your interest is building better people and believe, let's put it this way, investing in humanity as a growth asset, then you need to be realistic about what AI can do, and more importantly, what AI and people actually do together. And that's where this big new experiment that I allude to in the book, but the paper's about to come out later this month, really looks literally at that. And the title of that paper tells a big story. The title is Human Capital, Not AI Benchmarks, Predicts Hybrid Intelligence in Forecasting. We had people predict the future, literally, on their own. We had AIs doing it on their own, and then we had AI and humans doing it together. And that last condition is obviously the one I care about. And it was terrifying and it was wonderful. Terrifying because the vast majority of even brilliant students simply said, GPT, predict the future for me, and submitted those answers as their own. And literally, we monitored their brains, and it was like they were zoned out in front of a TV. But this small percentage went beyond it. We called them cyborgs. Their predictions were better than the best humans, which by the way, we're terrible. We we are terrible at predicting the future when we're not domain experts. Better than the best AIs. By the way, the worst AIs are still better than the best humans all by themselves at this task, but they were better than the best AIs. So in other words, hybrid intelligence at its best was better than either alone. But as people may know about today, there's this website called Polymarket where people are betting on the future. What will the price of oil be? Will there be a new front in Darfur, whatever it might be? Um, in 1 hour, making 10 predictions, three naive students at UC Berkeley did as well as people with millions of dollars at risk on Polymarket, which is so we have this amazing story of potential, this scary story of reality. Um, and that takes me to my last sort of policy thrust here, which is there's a missing policy initiative. There's the private sector, there's the public sector, then there's us. Where do we get served by all of this? Um, an AI that doesn't make mistakes, that isn't biased, that isn't malicious, but is still built by company X or controlled by the Defense Department of whichever country, still is making decisions that are almost certainly in the interest of those institutions. And I don't have to think that Sam Altman is a bad man to think that what's in his self-interest or what's in OpenAI's interest is not in my individual interest, particularly from a civil rights perspective. Like, how do I get a job? How am I confident in my opportunity to get a job, to get a loan, university admissions, fair treatment from the police, an independent diagnosis from a doctor, if everything's getting filtered through the same models? And in that, I think we're missing a component in the policy discussion. I talk about it in the book. One of my suggestions is an idea that's been around for a long time, which are data trusts, trust-like organizations that can aggregate people's data together. But I call it fiduciary AI. In that context, the models operate solely in the self-interest of the members of the trust. So it's like a doctor or a lawyer. Its sole fiduciary is to you, not to the organization that built and maintained it. And there really isn't an option like that today, unless you download an open source model and run it on your own computer. And realistically, very few people are going to do that. I do that for my research purposes. But even I, in my day-to-day, I use Claude and Gemini because it would be so tedious and difficult to have to maintain this separate system all the time for my everyday work. So I know, again, long and broad ideas. I think there's a role, public sector, private sector, but also a role at the individual level for us to sort of look for collective action. And this concept of fiduciary AI just isn't playing out. And then in a moment, hopefully I'll figure out a way to come back to the implications for AI benchmarks.
No, thank you. And that kind of feeds nicely into the idea of the cultural, the norms, the kind of the way that society views things. I mean, if you look today, somewhere along the lines we decided that investment banking yields a lot more economic incentive or value than, say, teaching kindergarten. And the way that our world has evolved, kind of puts some explicit and mechanic value on things in a way that reflects the systems that we've built. You mention in the book this idea of things worth more than AI and things worth less than AI. And I'm curious again from a human rights lens, but this world that evolves, how do we participate in a system where our goal is to make sure that we have fair, equitable, just treatment of individuals, but a recognition that the world has always seemed to evolve into these value systems that may pull you further away from that. I'd love to hear your
Yeah,
thoughts.
I mean, one thing there is, I don't think it's a full chapter. There's a section of the book titled If Kids Were Bonds. And, I pull on my own research there, but also Nobel Prize winner James Heckman, and my best guess, almost certainly someday Nobel Prize winner Raj Chetty. You look at the value of investing in kids, even at the value of investing in at-risk kids who almost certainly aren't going to change the world themselves. Though maybe, I mean, it only takes a tiny percentage of kids from these backgrounds. I'm going to be honest, kids like my dad, who grew up a sharecropper in nowhere, Kansas, and yet was a genius. And, I'm going to validate his own worst self-loathings that long passed away, unfortunately, which was he only ever lived to be a small town doctor. Now, such a small town doctor, I think he changed the lives of his patients. But he's right. When he graduated after just 3 years in high school in rural Kansas and got full scholarships everywhere, he didn't go because what was the point? And yet, he is undeniably a genius. And there are kids like that around the world every year. So obviously, there is the threat that we miss out on the child. I mentioned building an AI to treat my own son's diabetes. There is a kid in a favela in Rio, growing up in a village outside Kinshasa, going down the street from me in Oakland, California, who has a cure for diabetes in their potential, in their future. And the overwhelming likelihood is they will never lead the life that allows that potential future to be realized. So part of this is, and as I wrote about in the book, like even from an investment standpoint, it's kind of insane how little we put into what should be amazing jobs. Yeah, the returns on certain kinds of labor are really tangible and measurable and outsized. I get why it attracts the talent it does, but pulling on Raj Chetty's work has said as some of his less popular, the top 5% of teachers have shockingly strong, measurable impacts on their students' long-term life outcomes, earnings, health outcomes, and beyond. It's sort of amazing that we don't recognize how much the system could actually change, even an average life. So there's that in front of us, but I will tell you, far more than being concerned about Skynet taking over a la the Terminator, or other visions of a sort of dystopic future, the biggest negative implication for AI for me, apart from autonomous weapons, which is totally worth talking about, is a generation of young people with nothing to do, whose value, uh, from an economic perspective, is perceived to be less than the value of an AI doing similar labor. And so we buy into an argument which has been sold by Sam Altman, and it's been sold by many, which is, you know what, we'll just pay people to do nothing, except for the fact that people need meaning in their lives. I don't mean that as a philosophic statement. I'm a neuroscientist, and it turns out I'm writing a whole book called Small Sacrifices about the psychological construct of purpose and how much it predicts not just happiness and well-being, it predicts earnings, and it predicts all-cause mortality. It predicts education attainment. Taking that away from people, not even giving them the dignity of an underpaid job, is really problematic, because it will erode life outcomes across the board, even if we truly live up to that. And having known a number of billionaires in my life, the idea that they will willingly pay people to do nothing, I think is kind of farcical anyhow. That doesn't fit into my knowledge of Jeff Bezos, but or Elon Musk. So I don't know what vision, who's funding this. We will pay everyone to do nothing, but to me, it's a horrifying vision of the future. So I grew up in the Salinas Valley where John Steinbeck is from. And so I grew up on In Dubious Battle and East of Eden and Of Mice and Men. I watched generations of people walk out into a field, bend over, and pick lettuce for the rest of us. I actually believe it would be a human good for people not to have to do that just to feed their family. Almost certainly, most of them are crossing borders without permission. They're engaged in often risky propositions of being away from their family for long periods of time. Wow, what an amazing thing if we could truly see value in everyone and give them something valuable to do. But in the absence of that, giving them nothing to do, I think is a recipe for social dishesion. It's a recipe for social collapse, and eventually, if civil war sounds too alarmist a language, a sort of descent into a kind of unrecoverable inequality, which really genuinely alarms me because it goes fairly hand in hand with an erosion of civil rights.
And I'm just going to let everyone know that we will have time for questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to formulate them, throw them in the chat. Human questions only, but we will get to those in a second. One of the things that you kind of mentioned in that discussion of universal basic income, or that
Yep.
some of these new solutions are things that don't fit with what you would predict based on the personalities, behaviors. One of the things that we know from other things that we've provided to humans throughout history that have had risks of self-harm or danger, whether it's alcohol or stepping on a ladder or using a piece of complicated equipment, is that we try our best to make notifications or awareness. There's using this product can cause harm. Doing standing on this step is dangerous. Doesn't necessarily prevent the behaviors, but as humans, we've felt better about doing that. What do you think in the world of AI is either the kind of the baseline disclosure or awareness that we, kind of owe people to be aware of as they're engaging with, these AI tools?
I I'm going to get more nuanced in a moment, but let's just go with the headline statement here. I mentioned this experiment I just ran on hybrid intelligence, and I alluded to the finding, but I didn't give a number, that the majority of participants in my experiment essentially outsourced their cognition to an AI. By the way, this has been in different contexts replicated, even I think admirably by Anthropic, the maker of Claude. So one of the big players in this space have openly published papers showing software developers using Claude code actually get worse at their own internal coding ability over time, not better. But one thing they found, and I found at the same time, is that this isn't universal, but it is the majority. So upwards of 90, maybe even 95% of participants in our experiment kind of showed undesirable, negative behavior in engaging with AI. Um, and that's really worrisome, particularly that large majority that outsource their cognition, because as I alluded to, they're gamma band activity. So this is a measure of cognitive engagement, cognitive effort. You're solving a math problem. You're having a wonderfully engaged conversation. You're just thinking hard, imagining. Um, that is the signal. And it declines naturally as we age, but when it gets really low, that's also indicative of dementia and Alzheimer's. One of my companies specifically works in this space, and we literally developed a technology to augment gamma band activity as a treatment. So this is how important it is, and we're seeing it drop. And sometimes I've heard from people, oh, you're being an alarmist. Isn't this just like the printing press, the typewriter, the calculator, the computer? Well, no, it isn't just like it, but we can think about those. The printing press probably made collective intelligent cognition go up. Cheap books everywhere was wonderful for our cognitive development as a species. The computer, the typewriter, not clear that this was a huge value add, but certainly a productivity gain. But actually, there is a preceding technology that follows the same trajectory I've just warned about, which is GPS, Google Maps, Apple, Waze, whatever you might be talking about. About, boy, at this point, it's now beginning to approach 20 years ago. I made a prediction that using automated navigation would statistically increase dementia rates because we know navigating through space keeps us cognitively healthy and we don't have to do it anymore. A computer will do it for us. And the evidence is becoming increasingly strong that that's true. Now, it's way too soon to know how using agentic AI, to know empirically how it's affecting us. But I will say this with little hesitation, it will be even stronger effect than the GPS effects we've already seen because we see so clearly people are outsourcing their cognition. The printing press got you to think more. The typewriter, in all of these cases, it increased our ability to spread our ideas. It didn't produce the ideas itself. And that should really worry us. If you're a parent, if you're yourself, thinking about yourself, your long-term cognitive health is genuinely a thing. But here's the nuanced to go with that headline, AI is increasing dementia rates. Quote me on that. Hold me to account. Is what I said earlier. It's not affecting everyone the same way. Those students, the ones we called cyborgs in our experiment, they were very engaged. We saw lots of activity, at least as much as when they were thinking completely on their own. Because what they would do is they would say, GPT, tell me why I'm wrong. They would say, Claude, I have this great idea about what's possible. What does the data say? How am I thinking about this the right way? They would legitimately co-create. And I think even if we just talk about the internet and a lot of our worries with kids and social media, they are well-founded. People claim that the research literature is messy. It isn't. It's just averaged. And if we average every kid together, the results are a little ambiguous. But much like in my own experiment with AI, when we look at social media, what we see is probably the majority of kids are really being harmed here. Their academic outcomes are worse. Their well-being, psychological outcomes are worse. But there are these small but meaningful groups of kids who don't just look great. In some cases, they look better than they might have without social media. And the lesson for me, again, is we are empowered if we choose to be. If we don't just say, Elon, Sam, make these decisions for me, and instead, I want to use these models in a way that challenge me, a way that make me better. Like these adolescent girls in the social media research who are on TikTok and they're swiping through like their peers, but every now and then they stop and they really think about it. We can see it in their metadata. They go look something up on Wikipedia. They come back, they think more. They go look it up somewhere else and come back. They go deep every now and then rather than just living this sort of shallow, cognitively shallow life. That's kind of the signature. We as individuals choosing to go deep, we as policymakers thinking, how do we make this the default choice? And I'll finish with two really important thoughts. In that experiment I've been talking about, we had one last. I mentioned humans predicting the future, AI predicting the future, and then the two together. What was the best AI in the hybrid condition? Was it, does Gemini get to brag or does Google? It turns out it wasn't any of them. We took a simple open source, a small model, a model that had actually done the worst on its own. And then we made it even worse because we trained it to never give answers. If you said, what will the price of oil be in 6 months? It will say, well, that's a really interesting problem. Here's some things you ought to think about to answer that problem. Here's an article you might want to read. The students in my experiment hated using that system. Oh, even the ones that were the cyborgs, they hated it. They just wanted the answers. We called it Socrates, and the students genuinely did not like using it. And yet it had the highest level of average hybrid intelligence because now instead of 5%, 20% of students flipped over into this cyborg mode. So yeah, there's a human side. What predicts hybrid intelligence? Not AI benchmarks, not what AI can do on its own. What predicts is fluid intelligence, curiosity. When AI gives you an answer, do you say, but is there a better one? Intellectual humility. Do you ask AI to prove you wrong? Challenge you. And I think this is one of the coolest findings, perspective taking. In our experiment, students' ability to understand other human beings predicted our hybrid intelligence when working with an AI. So these four fundamentally human qualities predicted hybrid intelligence performance. And ironically, the AI that did the absolute worst on benchmarks, what it could do on its own, because it simply refused to give answers, did the best on hybrid intelligence. So here's my last call, a huge policy call. No individual can do this. This is about industry and about the public sector working together. We need benchmarks for hybrid intelligence. Right now, all industry is asking itself, and most of academia as well, is I've built a robot that goes and acts on its own. It's C3PO, it's its own thing. Can it answer every question on a medical exam board? Can it answer all of the math Olympiad questions? Can it solve economics problems? We're never asking, does it increase education attainment in the people using it? Does it reduce all-cause mortality? Does it increase incomes? But that should be our measure, particularly in light of my experiment that says the smartest thing on the planet right now isn't the bleeding edge of AI. It's a simple, small model working with a human being rich in those qualities I just described. So our education system should be all about those qualities, and our AI should be all about bringing those out. And right now, there is no public policy or private policy initiative in the space of a hybrid intelligence benchmark. So at my nonprofit, despite the fact that I'm far from sufficiently funded to make it happen, since I just fund it all myself, that's what we're building and trying to bring out into the world. In other words, when it's an AI that gives you what you need and not what you want.
Mhm. Excellent. And it actually tees right into one of the questions we received from someone on the line was asking, are there any current active policy or legislation efforts that we should be aware of or look at or encourage, either at state, local, federal, or conceptual level? Is there any policymaker we could point to say this is a person who's championing something that we need to see all the way through into fruition?
I think there are a lot of really well-intentioned policy initiatives. Far too many of them are focused on, I hate to put it this way, but worst case scenarios. Again, individual policymakers are often poorly positioned to lead these sorts of initiatives just because the models are complex, but they tend to legislate on the outside. Like I recall that San Francisco banned using facial recognition. Okay, I understand that. It's such a scary technology. And yet, in two separate instances, I built a system for autistic children that helped them learn how to read facial expressions by wearing, actually, I built it using that very pair of Google Glass back behind me. So a little camera on their head so they could, in real time, interact with other human beings and learn to read facial expressions. And then, as I alluded to earlier, I sort of built this little game based on facial analysis to reunite orphan refugees with their extended family member. Both of those are stories in the book. Is that illegal in San Francisco? It gets really hard to legislate the right thing to do in some of these contexts, especially given often a poorly understood idea that AI isn't programmed. We don't write code that says AI do this and don't do that. It doesn't think like we do, but it's worth putting it in those terms. You can't program your children. Instead, you need to build out this space in which, in a sense, it is rewarded for doing the right thing and punished, or at least not rewarded, discouraged from doing the wrong thing. And again, I'm going to raise the alarm that almost no one, even in academia, is looking at building a platform in which the right thing is human development and civil rights, and the wrong thing is AI autonomy in a way that erodes that. It simply doesn't exist. There are people, I think, really well intentioned that are building AI benchmarks, but they're still autonomous, but around what's called AI alignment, is decisions in the best interest globally of sort of humanity. Uh, but it's very presumptive. I think they presume they know what that means, rather than my work, which is really grounded in empirical, because these are so hard to get right. It's so challenging to know what the world will be like in 30 years. And putting all of your eggs in one basket is a terrible investment strategy. I'll put it this way. When I get asked about skills and kids, it's almost as though someone's saying, Dr. Ming, what one single stock? I'm going to sell my house and everything I own and put all of my money in one single stock and not touch it for 30 years. What should it be? Well, that's an insane question. 30 years from now, who knows? Invest for uncertainty. Like classic advice. We need to build kids for uncertainty. And we need policy that supports that concept that the impact of AI models will be uncertain. We should really focus on human development and human flourishing as the driving principle.
And we're going to conclude with one last question. And Megan, my apologies if I parse this up a little differently, but there in even in that last answer, you mentioned about is it good for the world and the global peace, and yet we have a very kind of national interest orientation in the way that people approach the development of AI, the use of the tools, whether it's competitiveness or economics or company kind of proprietary and ownership, but it doesn't necessarily come from an international cooperative lens and a collective good model. You referenced it earlier, people designing for either explicit or intrinsic self-interest, and that self being kind of divided more narrowly. So the question that Megan was posing is, that may be the reality, but if we aspire to have something that worked in the interest of the world and humanity as a whole, where should we start? Like, how do we, kind of reframe enough so that that is the direction that we're trying to move?
Uh, well, in this next book, the one titled Small Sacrifices, that doesn't exist, you can't go buy it, so you'll have to buy this one instead, is there's this really fascinating body of research on um, a zero sum or even sometimes a negative sum worldview versus a positive sum worldview. And, right in this moment, like it feels like we're sort of at 1900. It's just this weird, um, great game sort of thing with political powers vying with each other and a breakdown in this sort of collective action philosophy. Um, but what's fascinating in this research literature, and I'll pull out one study in particular, is they looked at a lot of classic economic games where, you know, in these like the prisoner's dilemma where you can defect and secure goods for you, but it makes it worse for everyone else. And so then maybe quickly everyone starts defecting. So they worked out really complex versions of these and they had agents, the very models we're talking about, playing these games over long periods of times against each other. And they found kind of what I'm contending here, which is there isn't a future. I'm not a futurist. I don't make predictions. I just think the dementia one is an easy prediction. Um, but there are choices. And in their finding of this paper is under the right conditions, virtually the same kind of world, simulated world, can literally become zero sum or can become positive sum. And it sort of becomes self-fulfilling. But I think what is most fascinating is that iterated over many, many trials is that the defectors that drive the world to being zero sum, almost paradoxically, they end up better in the versions of the world that are positive sum, even though they end up being, the warlords that dominate the zero sum world. They end up better than everyone else in those versions. They actually end up worse than they would have been in absolute terms in the positive sum world. And here's where I have always been maybe a bit of an AI utopianist. Not that it's a magic wand that fixes problems, or that we shouldn't be concerned about what can go wrong, or be realistic about how hard it is to make it work right. But it's that AI that really truly supports human development moves us towards a collective positive sum worldview. That it helps to develop these qualities like perspective taking and intellectual humility and curiosity that are transformative. Is everyone with those qualities always the best version of themselves? But they're better. Um, in my research, what I'm interested in doing is tying concrete measures of who someone is today to the quality of their eventual life. In fact, one of my favorite life outcome measures of all is walking speed at age 65. It turns out for such a simple idea, it captures all sorts of positive things about people's lives, even granted that not everyone, like it doesn't mean you have a better life just because there isn't a challenge, but just looking collectively across a wide group of people, it tells a really interesting story. And what's interesting about it is as these deep qualities that we don't currently pay attention to in school, that we don't hire for, that are vague public policy initiatives that have no teeth behind them. They're the things that predict these positive outcomes. And there is truly a role for AI in developing this in us. An AI that when I ask it a question, again, it gives me what I need from the perspective of how do I develop this in my person, the one who I am solely responsible to. And I have a real belief that we can do something positive in this space. I'm just worried that we are drifting zombie-like towards a very different outcome. And the zeitgeist of this moment is one of venality and self-interest and bullying, and it's genuinely shocking to me that I sort of live in this age that this has taken hold of America. But if I'm sort of all signed up in this idea that people can be amazing. I spent most of the 90s homeless, and I just got back from giving talks all over Europe, advising world leaders about things. Everyone is amazing. I think if we took that as a public policy given and we built around it, how do we get that amazing out of them in the best sense? AI can have an astonishing role in our life. Um, but for now, you know, we should be really, really thoughtful about things like autonomous weapons, about turning over control of these technologies to single entities that will then make all the decisions. God forbid any of them are run by former Fox News haircuts that have very little experience with the job that they've been inappropriately given. I think of what Mike Mullen said. I had a couple of dinners with him, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which was no general or admiral should ever be president of the United States. We simply already hold too much power, even once we're retired. That very statement is why he should be president, but of course it means he will never run. But I think it evidences the best aspiration of humanity. That moment when John McCain said that Barack Obama loves America and that, he doesn't wish the worst on all of us, and maybe it cost him the election. That's what we should aspire to. Even though I disagreed with everything about his policies, boy, do I wish I had the chance to vote for him today. So that sort of thing I know is in short supply in this moment, but leaning into, let's say, a left-leaning version of everything that's wrong with this moment is not the solution either. So I remain a deep believer in what humanity can do.
And with that, it did not take an algorithm to predict that we would run out of time before we ran out of things to talk about. But Dr. Ming, as always, thank you so much. And I'd like to, kind of preset our invites for each of the future books. And for the audience, please, if you haven't already read Robot Proof, please do. It's a great read, and all of the footnotes are worth their own conversations. We didn't get a chance here to talk about Doctor Who or any of the other pieces, but they are legitimately will enrich your reading experience. So thank you very much, Dr. Ming. And for those who joined us today, if this session sparked your interest, please join our Human Rights Center Book and Journalism Awards that'll be held on May 20th of this year. The book award was founded in 1980 with the proceeds from Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s best-selling biography, Robert Kennedy and His Times. Each year, we present an award to a book that most faithfully and forcefully reflects Robert Kennedy's purposes, his concerns for the poor and powerless, his struggle for honest and even-handed justice, his conviction that a decent society must assure all young people a fair chance, and his faith that free democracy can act to remedy disparities of power and opportunity. And we're thankful for everybody who joined us live. You will also be able to view this session or share it on your social networks through YouTube or our website. Please be sure to follow Kennedy Human Rights Center on social media and watch out for our next session. And until then, thank you, Dr. Ming, and thank you, everyone in the audience. And we'll be with you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.